Imagine this. You're standing in front of a towering, century-old mansion. The bricks are weathered, the gates creak when the wind blows, and the stories hidden within its walls could fill 1,000 lifetimes. To some, it's just an old house, outdated, oversized, a relic of the past. But to one man, Daniel Carter, it was much more. It was his inheritance, his legacy, and the last tangible connection to his late grandfather who built it with his bare hands. At first glance, you might think Daniel was lucky. Who wouldn't want to own a mansion passed down through generations? But luck is a tricky thing, because while Daniel saw memories in those halls, his neighbors saw nothing but envy and opportunity. And soon, what started as whispered complaints and side glances would explode into a full-blown war. It all began on a quiet evening when Daniel decided to restore the old mansion. Not to sell it, not to demolish it, but to breathe new life into the place that raised his family. He brought in contractors, landscapers, and even had plans to turn one wing of the mansion into a community library to honor his grandfather's dream. But not everyone liked the sound of that. The neighbors, especially those living in their cookie-cutter suburban houses across the street, didn't appreciate a giant, towering mansion in their view. They complained that the renovations were too noisy, that the house didn't fit the neighborhood, and that the constant arrival of workers was lowering property values. At first, Daniel brushed it off. He had every legal right to do what he was doing. But the neighbors weren't about to let it go. Within weeks, the complaints escalated. Petitions were filed. Anonymous letters arrived in Daniel's mailbox, telling him to tear it down or sell it off. Then came the phone calls, long drawn-out complaints to the city council. And finally, one evening, as Daniel was working late in the study, the sound of sirens pierced the silence. Red and blue lights flashed outside the wrought iron gates. Police officers stepped out, their boots echoing on the stone driveway. Daniel, confused, walked out to meet them. "Sir," one of them said, "we've had reports of illegal construction and potential safety hazards on this property." Daniel frowned. Illegal construction? Safety hazards? Nothing could have been further from the truth. Every permit had been filed. Every rule had been followed. He tried to explain, but the officers seemed less interested in the facts and more in appearances. After all, when neighbors complain loudly enough, the system listens. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in his grandfather's old chair, staring at the faded portraits on the wall, and one thought echoed in his mind. This isn't about construction. This is about power. From that moment on, the mansion wasn't just a house. It was a battlefield. And Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to lose. Because what his neighbors didn't know was that Daniel Carter wasn't just some sentimental heir clinging to an old house. He was a strategist. And while they plotted to tear his legacy apart, he was already laying the foundation for a move that would flip the entire neighborhood upside down. The days that followed were nothing short of war. The neighbors doubled their efforts, filing noise complaints, pushing city inspectors to visit the property every other day, and even hiring lawyers to challenge Daniel's renovation permits. It felt like every brick Daniel tried to place came with 10 obstacles waiting to stop him. But here's the thing. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who broke easily. He had inherited more than just a mansion from his grandfather. He had inherited his grit, his cunning, and his ability to think 2 steps ahead. Instead of fighting back in anger, Daniel began to study his enemies. He quietly attended neighborhood association meetings, listening to every word his neighbors spat about him. He gathered evidence of their harassment, documented their baseless complaints, and kept meticulous records of every official approval he had. To them, it seemed like he was cornered. But in truth, he was building something far more dangerous than a defense. He was setting up a counterattack. And then came the move no one expected. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel sent out a formal announcement. The mansion, he declared, would not just remain in his family. It would be transformed into a heritage and cultural center, a place open to the public, recognized by the city, and protected under preservation laws. That meant the mansion was no longer just a private residence. It was an institution, and suddenly his neighbors had no power over it. The news spread like wildfire. Reporters showed up. The city officials, eager to be on the right side of history, publicly supported Daniel's project. Where the neighbors saw an eyesore, the city saw a landmark. Overnight, the mansion went from being a target to being a symbol of pride. Tourists began arriving, schools planned field trips, and even local businesses saw a surge because of the attention. The neighbors, they were stunned. The very house they wanted torn down was now untouchable, protected by law, celebrated by the community, and admired far beyond their little street. Their petitions became meaningless. Their complaints were drowned out by applause. But Daniel wasn't done. He invited the same neighbors who fought him to the grand opening of the center. Some came reluctantly, some refused, but those who entered the towering gates couldn't help but feel a shift. Inside, they saw the photographs, the history, and the legacy that mansion carried. It wasn't just a house. It was a story of resilience, of survival, of family roots deeper than anyone could cut. And as Daniel stood before the crowd, he finally spoke. "You tried to destroy this house, but this house is not just brick and stone. It's a memory, a legacy, and now it belongs to everyone. You tried to bury history, but history has a way of rising stronger than before." The applause echoed through the halls, louder than any complaint ever filed. From that day forward, the mansion stood unchallenged. The neighbors, once bitter, eventually faded into silence. Some even began bringing their children to the library wing Daniel had promised. And while Daniel could have lived in anger, he chose something far greater. He turned opposition into opportunity, hate into history, and envy into inspiration. The lesson? Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight harder, it's to fight smarter. And when people try to tear down your legacy, you don't just protect it, you elevate it so high that no one can touch it again.